microgreens, basically. Like I said, I'm going to go through a PowerPoint. Hopefully you can see me on the side. Let me know in the chat if you can't. And then, like I said, I have some props, things to show you other than what's on the slides. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to do a little adjusting here. Apparently I can't see the chat. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Never mind, I got it back. We have a question, is there a printout? There isn't a printout, but we will be posting this program to YouTube in the next day or so. So if you want to go back and take any notes, you can always take a screenshot or even use your phone to take a picture if there's a slide you want to particularly save. You can also email me if you have any particular questions. Like I'm going to, like I said, I'll try to monitor the chat as best I can for questions. But we will be sending the YouTube link to everybody that signed up for the program tomorrow. And you can watch it over and over and over again if you want to. All right. Okay. All right. These are the types of things we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be dwelling more on sprouts and microgreens than the other two, because if you've mastered those, you can master just about anything once you get comfortable with sprouting. Sprouts are easy and quick. They're usually used for fresh eating, sometimes cooked, like in stir fries. They're usually used as the whole sprout with the seed attached. And pre-sprouting for cooking is when you take grains or beans that you plan on cooking, like for making bean soup or making oatmeal or anything like that. You sprout it just till they sprout, and then you use them. You don't let them get a long little tail on them. After they're sprouted, you can re-dry them and store them or grind them into flour, whatever, like if you sprouted wheat, you could grind it into flour after it's dried again. Microgreens are tiny little plants that are grown densely in trays until their first leaves are formed, and they're used fresh or in cooking. And you don't eat the seeds and the roots with microgreen. They're a little bit far along for that, and they're usually grown in soil or some kind of substrate, so you don't eat those. And baby greens are just microgreens that have been allowed to grow a little longer. They need obviously take more time. They're on the other end of the spectrum from sprouts. Usually you have something in 4 to 5 days, whereas baby greens, it can be 1 or 2, 3 weeks. So a lot of people, you might not want something on your counter that long. It's up to you. We're going to start with basic sprouting. And one of the many reasons you like to sprout is because you can get a wide variety of fresh, nutritious vegetables all year round. If you're quarantining in your house and you have a supply and you're kind of missing fresh lettuce or fresh other greens, you can have sprouts, and it really helps. You can put them on your burgers, anything you want, any way you would use lettuce. and it kind of fills that void if you can't get out and get fresh vegetables at the store. They're economical. If you've ever bought sprouts in the store, they can get kind of pricey. So it's a if you're really into eating sprouts, it's a really great idea to learn to do it yourself. You'll save a lot of money. Control of safety and production. One of the problems over the years that has plagued commercial production of sprouts is foodborne disease. You know, they've tried to fix most of those problems, but it used to be water that wasn't up to par that was using to make the sprouts. In your small little kitchen, it's highly unlikely you will encounter such a problem, because you control your cleanliness, you control the water that you're using, you control how they're stored. But you know, it's just a lot safer than buying ready-made sprouts. It doesn't take up much room. Even at our house where we use a lot of sprouts, we seldom have more than 2 mason jars on the counter at any given time. We kind of rotate through the different kinds, so you know, it takes up maybe less than a square foot of counter space. Sprouts, when they sprout, a transformation takes place. It ceases to become a seed and it becomes a plant. And so the nutrition level jumps. I'm no chemist or scientist, so you know, if you want to look up all of those things, you know, these components of the food that jump when it's sprouted. It's easier to digest. People who have problems with you know, eating beans or eating grains, usually once the grain is sprouted, it's much more digestible. Lectins and phytates are lowered in sprouts. Lectin is a type of protein. It's found in beans, seeds, and the nightshade vegetables like peppers and tomatoes and eggplants. And phytic acid's another one, also found in beans, seeds, nuts. These are 2 things that for most of us, it just passes through our system. But when, if you have Crohn's disease, some autoimmune diseases, some inflammatory diseases, lectins and phytates can flare up both of those. So by sprouting, you're lowering those amounts of those in your food. So that's a real benefit. And sprouts are inherently low in calories. So that's always a good thing. Okay. You don't need much for sprouts. You can generally, you need this mason jar, a wide mouth mason jar, and some sort of lid. Those of you who picked up your kits have a green lid. There's also a 2-piece lid on the market. I gotta see what I'm doing here. It's like a stainless steel screen that fits in a canning jar lid and screws on. So, but yeah, there's lots of different lids on the market. This jar of sprouts is, this is a lid that it's probably our favorite. It's a little more expensive than the basic lid, but what I like about this one is when you're rinsing, you point the water in here and it helps it go in rather than kind of puddling on the top of the lid. It's also got relatively tall little ridges here, so when you're trying to drain your sprouts, you can set them on the counter and it gives you, look, it doesn't form an airlock underneath it, and you can drain your sprouts, whoops, right on your lap if you're not careful. We'll revisit that in a minute. Someone asked if they could still pick up their kit tomorrow. Yeah, with we had probably a dozen people sign up the last couple of days, so they couldn't get in and get their kits right away. So I'm going to leave the kits out in the foyer for a few more days, give everybody a chance to pick them up. Okay. Always buy organic seeds that are intended for sprouting. That's really important because some seeds that are meant for agriculture, they could possibly have been treated with something like a fungicide, or they, they just may not have been handled in a way that they would handle seeds that are intended for food. So always buy organic seeds. At the end of this uh, program, I've got a slide with one of them, or with a handful of the many places that you can buy seeds and equipment from, that sell seeds that are intended for sprouting. You need a source of clean water, preferably filtered or purified. Sprouts are like anything else. They're whatever you put in them, you're going to be eating. So if you're using the famous South Lyon Township well water that hasn't been filtered, it might be fine, but it's just, you get a better product. It smells better. Also, if you have city water, make sure you don't have chlorine in it. Chlorine can hamper the sprouting process and damage the sprouts. And you just need to have an area to sprout away from a lot of light and draft. We do ours on the kitchen counter, but we usually wrap a kitchen towel around it to keep most of the light out. I always say sprouts are comfortable where you're comfortable. If it's really cold and you set them in a drafty area, you're going to invite mold and fungus, because the coolness could possibly cause the seeds to, instead of growing, they might just sit there and rot. So it's good to, like I said, if you're comfortable, they're comfortable. Some of the most popular sprouts are, for vegetables, are alfalfa sprouts. I think those are the center in the picture. They're one I think most people are probably really familiar with. But you can also use broccoli or cabbage, radish, red clover. Actually, there's a long list of sprouting seeds that you can use. The legumes, the mung beans are another really common sprout that you see at the store. Those are the ones, they're on the the right side of that panel. They're not, on that picture, they aren't, haven't sprouted for very long. They look like they're just starting their process. But mung beans are what you generally see in stir fries, the nice big fat white mung beans. Adzuki beans, another little red bean about the same size as the mung bean, and lentils. And a lot of people don't think about sprouting lentils, but they're actually our favorite, I think, next to alfalfa, or a salad mix, because they're flat. They're not super dense, so they are easy to eat, even raw. And for grains, a lot of people, you can use wheat, barley, rice, rye, oats, any whole grain. But like I said, make sure it's meant to be eaten and it's not meant to be just planted. Okay, so generally for a mason jar, the type of sprouting mix, probably our favorite, is this one. It's, is that backwards? But it's a 3-part salad mix. It's got organic alfalfa, organic radish, and organic broccoli seeds in it. And so the radish kind of gives it a little kick, but it's not overly so. They're not super spicy. And the broccoli kind of gives it some body, and then the alfalfa sprouts are, give it the bulk, I guess you could say. I usually start with that particular seed, 2 tablespoons, and this is what 2 tablespoons of that sprouting mix ends up looking like. It's a full very full jar um, of sprouts. Um, and some things, like if you're going to be sprouting some grains, say we're going to make oatmeal in a couple of days, and you want to sprout your um, uh, well, we'll go into that later. But if you want to, it's just how much you want of whatever you're doing. So oatmeal, if you take a cup of oatmeal to cook, then you would want to sprout a cup of oatmeal. So basically, just put the seeds. I say 2 tablespoons of seed if we're going to do this type. Put it in the lid. Put on your lid and pour water over the seeds and drain them. I always like to give them a rinse first, and then fill the jar about half full of water with the seeds in there. And this covers the seeds and allows for expansion. The little seeds don't expand that much, but if you use pea seeds or something like that, they can probably triple their size overnight. So if you don't put enough water in there, you could end up with seeds that haven't soaked well enough. So it just kind of depends. You kind of get a feel for it as you go along. But the smaller the seeds, the less water you have to use, I guess is a good rule of thumb. So after the seeds have soaked overnight, then you drain them. There's a nifty little, let me use my other hand. There's a nifty little product on the market that comes in various forms, made out of different things. This one happens to be a plastic. But it just basically holds your jar. Maybe I'll go back a little bit. It holds your jar. It tilted slightly, and it's got a little reservoir down in here to kind of keep the drips. And it kind of is a great way to drain your sprouts. And you can even leave them like this if you want to. You don't, generally what we do at home is after they're drained, we just lay the sprouts on their side, the jar on its side, covered. We just wrap it in a kitchen towel and lay it on the counter. And you rinse and drain probably every 4 to 6 hours. If you go to work for 8 hours, don't stress out. Just do it when you leave and do it when you get home. They generally, like I said, unless they're in a graft or in a, it's really warm, or then they generally don't dry out that fast. They're really forgiving. So probably the biggest pain about doing sprouts is harvesting them. Only because you want to separate the hulls from the sprouts ultimately. Because the water isn't great here at the library, I didn't want to drain a half of a water cooler jug. I was going to wash things for you, but I'm just going to pantomime it because I actually want to use these sprouts. I don't want to waste them, and I don't want to use library tap water for them. So you take your, let's do it this way. Remove the sprout lid and fill a good sized bowl. It's fairly deep. I like a nice stainless steel bowl. And dump your sprouts out. And sometimes you have to give them a little help. Okay. So you've got your sprouts in the bowl, and you'll see the little brown holes. And so basically fill up your bowl so there's quite a bit of water in it, and start swishing, so that the sprouts are well covered, and start swishing them around. And you'll just know as you're swishing, the hulls usually fall to the bottom. Some will float, but you can get most of them off. And you might want to repeat it if you didn't get it. You can, but once the hulls are off, you pick up your sprouts out of the water. You don't want to pour them out and put them in a colander, strainer, sieve, something, and give them a good rinse. And like I said, if you still feel like there's a lot of holes in there, you're never going to get them all off. But you can really get most of them off. But the holes decay rapidly, and if they're left on your sprouts, they will start to cause them to have odors, and they just won't last as long. They'll get icky faster. So a well-washed sprout without the hull is going to last the longest. And air dry them for a while, and let them drain thoroughly. And after you've air dried them, you can even, if you still feel like they're pretty wet, you can put them in, like pat them with a paper towel or a regular towel. Just kind of make it so that they're damp but not wet. You don't want, and there's no water pooling in the bottom. If one of the things you can do, like sometimes we put them right back in the jar and put them in the fridge with a regular jar, a non-perforated lid that isn't airtight. We'll go into that later about storing them, but you can use them immediately right after you harvest them, or you can refrigerate them to use them later. So here we go about storing. Sprouts last a long time if they're stored correctly. They don't last very long at all if they aren't. So as we talked about, drain well. You can use a salad spinner, pat them dry with a towel. Now there's a product called citric acid. It's usually available places that sell canning supplies because it's used for other things like keeping apples from discoloring, and so it's kind of a substitute for lemon juice sometimes if you want to keep things from coloring. But if you use them in your rinse water while you're rinsing your sprouts, add about a teaspoon per quart, give or take. That also helps prolong their usability. It's not something you have to do, but it is one option if you feel like your sprouts just aren't lasting as long as you want to. Now, as I said, avoid an airtight container, but yet somebody else will, and I've done it both ways. What really works nicely, and they are reusable. I'm a big one for reusing Ziploc bags, but are these Ziploc vegetable bags. Some of you might be familiar with them. They're very, they've got little perforations in them. I'll say perforations all over them. And this is great for storing sprouts. It's probably the best option. We have a comment. Can you eat the hulls? You can. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just part of the seed. But like I said, they just tend to go bad faster than the rest of the sprout. That's why you try to get them out. But if you want to eat them after you've taken them off the sprouts, you go right ahead. You could put them in a smoothie. I don't know what nutritional value the hulls have. I've never thought about it real hard. But you can, another thing is to put them, to store any kind of greens, and this works for greens like lettuce and things too, is to wash them and put them in wrap them up in either paper toweling or a cloth towel. I really like I guess they're called like flour sack towels or kitchen towels. They're thin, they're not terry cloth, and you can get a bunch of them cheaply and use them instead of paper towels, and you feel good about that, and you're not killing a tree every time you do your sprouts. But you can roll them up in a towel like that or paper toweling and put them in a Ziploc bag. And they stayed really well that way. I guess what you're trying to avoid is having them sit in wetness. I've even put like some paper toweling in the bottom of a mason jar just to kind of soak up the moisture so the sprouts aren't sitting in it. There's just lots of little tricks you can use. Um, you can, like I said, if you don't, you can use, if you don't have a vegetable bag, you can put plastic wrap over the bowl or container that they're in and just poke a few holes in it with a toothpick or something, and that's another way. So store in the crisper drawer is the best place because that's a nice cold area that doesn't get a lot of drafts. Just make sure, I know we all had refrigerators at one point or another that you put stuff in a certain area and it turns out freezing. You want to avoid that because sprouts do not do well after freezing. Now, I always like to give the sprouts another rinse before I use them. I guess you don't have to because you've always washed them well, but what the heck. In this day and age, I don't think you can wash anything too much. So sprouts are used for, these fresh sprouts are used for like salads. You can use them in place of lettuce on burgers and sandwiches and in wraps. You can put them in soup. When I use them in soup, I like to put them in at the last minute so they don't cook. They still retain their crunch. I think that picture looks like pho, and which is Vietnamese soup that's super yummy. And of course, stir fries. There's a picture of pad thai, which is a big favorite dish that is usually pretty heavy on the bean sprouts. And you can juice them too. You can put them right in your, if you make a smoothie in the morning, you can throw them in there and whip them up and you get all that nutrition. Never know they're there. Now I spoke a little earlier about pre-sprouting for cooking. If you want to look at that, if you can see that picture very well, those are sprouted lentils. And they have just started to sprout. And actually, you don't even have to let them get that long. I call them schnauts because they look like little snouts on them. But you don't have to even let them get that long. As soon as you can see that little sprout, then you can use them. A lot of people like to pre-sprout beans, anything in the bean family, because that makes them more digestible, makes their nutrients more available. They're not bound up in the seed itself. And you, like I say, if you are going to be making a pot of soup and you're going to need 2 cups of beans, sprout 2 cups of beans. But basically, it's the same as the sprouting your salad sprouts. Is you soak the seed for 8 to 12 hours in a mason jar, or I've even soaked them right in the pan I'm going to cook them in. If you don't want to mess another vessel up. But that's especially for beans. I like to soak them, rinse and drain, repeat every 4 to 6 hours, give or take. Again, like if you have to go to work, don't stress out. I usually just leave the cover on and keep it as dark as possible. They sprout really quickly. I've sprouted, hold on, I gotta get one of my, I don't know how well you can see this, but these are wheat sprouts. I started the same day as the other sprouting seeds, which was Thursday. And my intention was to grab them out when they had just got their snout, but obviously I forgot. So now I have a whole thing of bean sprouts. I'll figure out how to, or wheat sprouts. I'll figure out how to use them. But these things sprout really rapidly. And if you're going to use them for cooking, it only takes a day or 2 before they start to sprout. You can harvest them and use them as soon as the sprouts appear. If you're not going to use them right then, put them in the fridge, but they could continue to sprout. It depends on how determined they are. Most of the grains and beans like it a little warmer, but Some cool loving sprouts might they might continue to grow in the fridge. Now, another thing that if you've ever seen in the store sprouted flour or you can buy sprouted beans. Those are basically things, they just sprouted them and then they re-dried them, dehydrated them again. And you can then they're shelf stable. You can store them right on your shelf then for use later. Or you can dry them, grains, and if you have a flour mill at your home, some of us do, then you can grind them into flour that way. It's pretty ambitious, but if you're really into this kind of stuff, it's fun. Now microgreens. Oh, right before we go on, we've got a question. Have you used the wheat sprouts in bread? You can definitely bake them into bread, and that would be a good thing to do with these that are really too far gone. I mean, you could cook them now, but the sprout part will just disintegrate and be mushy. So I'd rather use these in something. If I was making a pot of beans, I could throw these into it and let them cook, and they will. Even if the sprouts disintegrate, it'll still be part of the soup, and the nutrition that's in them will still be in the soup. So that'd be a great way to use those. But yeah, you can bake them into bread. Anything. You can actually bake pretty much any sprout into bread, and and kind of increase the nutrition of it. So microgreens are kind of sprouts that have allowed to grow until they get their first set of leaves or their second set of leaves. And you can generally, they're put into either soil, a thin layer of soil, or some kind of a mat. I've got another slide where I'll show you what those look like. And you don't need to fertilize them. They grow really quick. They just have to go a few more days than from these types of sprouts, because you actually want them, after they've sprouted, you want them to become, you want them to be exposed to light and form chlorophyll and get their color. So sprouting trays, I'm really a big fan of using what you have, as far as using found things you already have around the kitchen. But most people that get super into sprouting eventually invest in some commercial equipment that's a little easier to use. But any of these things would work fine. A big pie pan. It's deep enough. You only probably need about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch of soil to do microgreens. Deli containers. This is, I think, a pie container. I save everything. And a lot of deli containers are nice because they come with their dome, and you can use this for the first few days while you're sprouting they're starting to sprout, and then you remove it later. Our greens from the store come in these awesome. I use these for a lot of things. I save them all. And aluminum trays. Now, I know a lot of people don't like to cook with aluminum, but as far as what I've read is the aluminum isn't soluble. It doesn't get taken up into the sprouts. That's mostly happens when you cook in aluminum. So I think, and these come in all sizes. And if some of them come in like more for size of like for a loaf of bread. So if you wanted to have several types of sprouts going at once, or microgreens, you could use those and line them up. Source of clean water, same as the other ones. What it goes in, what it goes out, is what you're going to be eating. And you can get little countertop units as well. I've kind of have a few things on here. Um, I took these from the True Leaf Market website and gave them, just in case anybody wants to know. But it's one of the sellers that sells a lot of equipment. But you know, you want to use organic soil. I really wouldn't skimp on that. You use so little soil that if you buy a bag of organic potting soil, it's going to last you for a while. These are those mats I was talking about. They're usually 10 by 20. They're made to fit in a standard nursery tray, but you can cut them up to any size you want. You can use down here, this is a setup that is used for starting seeds, but there's no reason you couldn't use them for microgreens too, especially I see a use for this one for wheatgrass, which we're going to cover in a few minutes, because you may only want a handful of those a day, so you could just pop one out every day from that little container. It's got the drain tray, it's got the dome, it's all one thing. This long tray is more what commercial growers use. And some of them will plant the whole tray in one type of sprouts, and some of them will plant, want to have several going of different kinds. And these little inserts they sell that fit, so you could have 8 different types of sprouts growing in the flat at the same time. And you can get little kits that have, like this particular kit has a little wick that has a reservoir of water and a little wick, so it kind of keeps it wet all the time. Those things are nice to have, but certainly are not necessary. Now, microgreens need light, so again, you can go as minimalist or as crazy as you want. If you just have if you're just doing, say one tray at a time, you can put them under a little LED lamp like that for a few days. That's about all. And those come in all different shapes and sizes. You can get long, skinny ones that would cover more of the flat. This is Gardner Supply Company, another company that sells a lot of stuff. This is a countertop model. It looks big because of the picture, but it's really it's a countertop type, as is this one. If you want something that's pretty, you can make or buy something. If you've got fluorescent or LED fixtures like this that hang, or you can definitely hang those and put your sprouts under those. You can use under counter lights that screw onto the underside of your kitchen counters and put them under those. And if you really are going to go crazy and you want to have a lot going, you can get one of these big units or build something similar. That's a 3-shelf unit. That's really nice. It's really expensive. It's really, really expensive. You probably could buy sprouts for the rest of your life and never come to what that cost. But, sometimes you just want something that makes your life easier or, works flawlessly. And if it means that much to pay, but those big units are hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Microgreens are really easy to grow. They're really fast to grow, and you can usually find seeds for them, the same ones you would use for sprouting. Microgreens are just sprouts that have been allowed to grow longer. The difference is basically you're cutting them and harvesting them rather than using the whole thing with the seed in the hull, and the hulls usually fall off of the microgreens as they grow and their leaves open up. So you don't have to worry about dehulling them as a rule. Now, all of these, I think are all, except for lettuce, these are all related. the arugula, broccoli, cabbage, kale, mesclun, mustard, pak choy, radish. Well, the mesclun usually is a mixture of mustards and lettuces, but you know they're all fast growing, and um, you know they don't take long. Now, if you master that, then maybe you can go on to the more advanced ones. And what makes them advanced is usually that they don't sprout as fast. And whenever the longer you have your sprouts going, and I say sprouting because that's the first step, and it takes the longest. Once they start growing, they really grow fast. But 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 the longer that they're in that stage, there's more of a chance for mold or other, you know, problems to erupt. So um, amaranth, basil, beet, chives, cilantro, a lot of the herbs take a while. Spinach, which it likes cool weather, but it's not particularly fond of. It doesn't grow quite as fast as the ones in the other category, so he ends up in advance. So basically, it takes longer. You're going to have them on your counter longer. So that's why they're in a different category. You just have to keep a little closer eye on them to make sure and check them every day, make sure they look good. There's large greens, peas and sunflowers. They make really cool microgreens, but they're big, so you don't plant them quite as densely inside of the container, and you again, they take longer because they're bigger, but they're so yummy. You can grow any of your grains. Most people have heard of wheatgrass, and wheatgrass is basically, you can make any kind of grass. You can do barley grass, oat grass, rice grass, buckwheat grass. Any of the grains can be used. And depending on, most of the grains are used as microgreens are used for juicing or some type of cooking. They're a little bit chewy to eat. They're, instead of being crunchy, they're more fibrous, I guess you would say. So you don't, and if you're going to use them on your salads or in cooking, you really want to kind of chop them fine, like you would chives, maybe, just chop them up. You can do all of your legumes, beans, lentils, and chickpeas. And you can mix. You can put a mixture together, or you can plant, a section of your tray in each one. Just make sure they kind of have a similar growing rate, because you don't want to grow arugula, which is usually done in, just maybe 3 to 5 days. It grows super fast, but you don't want to put it in there with chives or cilantro, which are going to take longer, because then you'll end up with, so keeping them separate is a good idea if you're going to grow different kinds together. You can definitely grow a lettuce mix together, or a mustard and lettuce mix. Any of those in that first category, the easy and fast growing, could all be mixed together if you wanted to. So microgreens, very similar to growing just your regular sprouts. You can soak the seeds, but not as long. You don't really want to go overnight or many hours. Maybe just an hour or two, just to kind of get them jump started, I guess you could say. Beans you can do a little longer, but you can skip the step if you want to. If you're ready to plant your seeds and you forgot to do the pre-soak, go ahead and plant them. It's just going to take a little bit longer to erupt. Put about a half an inch to 1 inch of the soil in the tray, or put down, if you're using one of those mats, just cut that to fit. If it doesn't fit in you can buy those mats and cut them up for smaller containers. Level the soil and tamp it down. You can use a tool if you have one, like a trowel or something that's got a flat bottom. But I just generally use my hand. It's easier, faster. And then sprinkle the seeds evenly over the surface. And then you tamp them down again so that you're pushing the seeds down gently down into the soil. You don't want to compact everything. You don't want to like beat on it and make it, but you do want to settle the seeds into the soil. Um, how densely to plant the seeds is kind of depends on what it is, but you probably you don't want to get it so dense that they're just packed in there too tight, but you want it to be pretty dense because the whole idea of microgreens is to get a lot of little plants out of a small space. You kind of get the hang of it. Most people generally that do microgreens do the paper towel method, or again, you can use a flour sack cloth or something very light towel. Um, but and some people like a thin layer of sifted soil over the top of their seeds. The problem with that is that when your seeds start to germinate, they literally push that layer of soil up, and sometimes that can be a problem. Other people think, nah, it's not a problem. But by putting the paper toweling over it, it kind of makes it so when you water, the seeds don't scatter. It kind of holds everything in place a little bit better. Um, so when you put the toweling on, then water through it. Sometimes when people, if they're not using toweling, or even if they are, the first time they water, they might want to use a spray bottle or something that's going to be very gentle watering the seeds, because you don't want to blast all the seeds over to one end and then have, it could cause a real irregular, when they all germinate. You might have really thick in some areas and thin in some areas. So by watering through the toweling, that kind of keeps everything in place. Usually you only have to water once a day. If you have a cover, one of those clear domes to put over it, you can by all means use it. Take it off every day. You may find that you don't need to water them every day. If you use a double tray system where you've got one tray with drainage setting inside another, or on something else where that's catching the draining. But some people just use they don't use something that drains. And in that case, you've got to be very careful you don't overwater, because you could end up with soup, basically dirt soup with rotting seeds in it. So if you um, use dirt and use a paper towel method, and only water enough to keep it moist, but not enough to keep it soggy. There's a fine line there. Um, once your seeds have sprouted and you're watering, it's better actually to water, to kind of get the water in at the base of the plants. The drier you keep your sprouts, your microgreens, the better off they're going to be. They're going to be less likely to get some kind of a mold or mildew situation going. Um, so when all your seeds have germinated, you can peek under the paper toweling, pull up a corner, and when it looks like all of the seeds have germinated, you can gently remove the toweling. If they rooted in, usually they stay where they are and they don't come up with the toweling. Now, if you pull up the corner of the toweling and they're all sticking to the toweling, that means they need to go another day. If they haven't developed enough roots in the soil to keep them anchored. So kind of, just kind of peek in there and see what they're up to. So once they germinate and the paper toweling's off, then they need some light. They don't need you know, yeah, I mean, under a light fixture is really great, but if you have a sunny windowsill, that's probably going to be adequate. They're not going to be in the container long enough. When you're starting seeds for growing them, like putting them in your garden, you wouldn't want them to look like this with all these spindly little seeds. But when you're growing microgreens, that's okay. The more light they have, the more less spindly they will be, though, because they will grow a little more compactly. Um, if it's the dead of winter, you know, right around the end of December and January, the days are really short. So you may want to use a combination of window light and, um, you know, some sort of a grow light or LED fixture. Plain LED lights are fine. You don't have to buy a special grow light. Again, these things are only going to be growing for a few days before you eat them. So it's not like you have to worry about red spectrums and blue spectrums and, you know, all of that. They just grow and grow and you eat them. So you kind of want to get about 8 hours a day of bright light. Some people say they have pretty good results with only 4 hours of bright light. It's all kind of experimenting because, you know, is your window a north window? Is it a south window? Do you have trees in your yard? You know, there's a lot of things that can be variable about putting them in front of a window. Um, the big ones like sunflowers and peas, they need a, quite a bit more light, or you just get really tall, little lanky things. Um, so again, water them daily. Once they've started growing, just water them from the bottom. Put the spout of the whatever you're using to water it, like at the soil level instead of just spraying it over the top of the plants. Um, if your trays look kind of waterlogged, then don't skip a watering. Skip 2 waterings if you have to. Like I said, you don't want dirt soup. Um, and the more spindly your plants are, the more light they need, whether that bothers you or not. If you, this slide or this picture right here kind of shows really densely planted sprouts, microgreens that there's probably 2 densely planted. They're thin, their little stems are incredibly thin. Um, Now this slide here, these look like sunflower sprouts to me, and they um, are much more robust, I guess you could say, but that's part of the nature of just being a big sprout. So any of these are perfectly usable. To harvest microgreens, because you've kept the soil and the water off the leaves and the stems, they're usually pretty clean, so you don't have to worry about getting dirt on them. Usually 7 to 14 days. Again, you kind of just have to watch. Depends on temperature, depends on light, depends on what type of seed it is. The cotyledon stage are the first set of true leaves. They're little heart-shaped leaves that come out first. When they and then relatively short time after that, they get their first set of true leaves. So it's going to look like the leaves that they're supposed to look like. You can harvest at either stage. Some people like to get them right away at the cotyledon stage, or some people like to let them grow just a hair longer and get their first set of true leaves. After the first true leaves, they'll come. Then if you want to keep them longer, you might want to give them some, like a kelp fertilizer, something that seems pretty edible. I wouldn't get like the, you know, Miracle Grow stuff. You know, I would use something that is a little more natural. And because if you let your microgreens keep going, they become baby greens, which is perfectly acceptable for most types of sprouts and microgreens, is to let them get bigger. But they will get stressed and overcrowded if you let them get too big, and if they're not given some nutrients, they're going to be, you know, kind of past their prime, I guess. Water them before, you know, maybe like the night before if you're going to harvest them in the morning, so that they're nice and crisp and they're full of water, so that and they store better that way too. But they can be harvested using scissors or a knife. Scissors are the easiest. Cut about a ½ inch above the soil level. You want all that stem on there. You know, it's good for fiber and everything, and they have a lot of flavor. You don't want to cut just the tops off because you're wasting a lot of your sprout then. So cut them above the soil level. You can rinse them off if you're going to eat them immediately. You can, on a, like in the picture up above, you could only harvest half that, or just maybe a quarter of it, and the next day harvest some more. And so you don't have to harvest them all and put them in the fridge if you don't want to, unless they're getting too big too fast. So wash them if you're using them immediately, but otherwise store them without washing and rinse them before you use them. The more leaf matter that's on them, the more likely they are to spoil faster. So it's better to wash them just before you use them. Store them about the same as sprouts. Um, and your soil, you can throw in the compost. It's full of little roots. It's not really usable again. Um, and I think most of the mats are made from natural products too. And I've seen um, pictures of people who grow a lot of microgreens, like commercial things, and they just compost and have layers and layers of those mats and letting them break down for compost. It's a pretty impressive sight. Microgreens can be used a lot of different ways. One of the ways I like them is to chop them up and put them in a quiche. And if you don't have fresh or frozen broccoli, but you want a broccoli quiche, you can, if you have some sprouts, you can cut them up and put them in there and get that flavor and that crunch and that nutrition without going to the store and buying something in the middle of winter. You can sprinkle sprouts into soup. This pizza, those are little past sprouts. Those are definitely baby greens, but I didn't have another picture, so I used that. But definitely any kind of sprouts can be put on pizza. If you've never put greens on your pizza, you're missing out on something, because it's pretty awesome. And of course, they can always be put into smoothies. Some people like to grow greens for pet grass. Again, it's the kind of thing that you can buy in the store. You can get those little cups, and we put water in them, and for a fraction of that cost, you can use any of the grains, the wheat, oats, barley. That all makes good pet grass. But you can use them any way you'd use any vegetable. Okay, let's go. There we go. So microgreens allowed to grow another week or so are called baby greens, generally used in salads, and grown the same way as microgreens. You may not want to plant the seeds quite as thickly, and you might want to use a slight bit more potting soil because they're going to be longer in there. Um, so yeah, 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what it is. Different greens grow faster. Again, diluted liquid kelp fertilizer after the first true leaves develop will really make your greens more robust. They'll have better color and better nutrition. So that's now wheatgrass is something you may have heard of or used. You grow them the same as you grow for baby greens, and you can give them a little fertilizer if you want after they're a couple inches tall. You can harvest about 4 to 6 inches. If you let them, they're at their sweetest at that stage. If you let them grow longer, they get a little more fibrous and a little less sweet. You can still use them, but they just taste better at a slightly younger age. Now, one thing that's different is with wheatgrass and a couple of the others, if you cut them maybe an inch high, and leave that stubble, they may regrow. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's kind of hit and miss. And some people even let them grow a third time. I think, as long as you keep watering them with a really diluted fertilizer, they might even make a third crop. By that time, everything's probably exhausted, and you should probably compost it and start over. Wheatgrass requires a special juicer. It's very fibrous, so if you have your standard juicer that you're going to use to make your smoothies, or for citrus, or for all the other types of juicers, what you need is a masticating juicer to make wheatgrass. You can certainly chop it and throw it into smoothies and blend it up real well, and that works too. You can dry your wheatgrass, in a dehydrator or a slow oven, and then crunch it up and even put it in a blender or in a food processor and make it into a powder. If you've ever bought powdered greens, they're super expensive, so that's one way you could make your own. Barley, rye, and oats can also be used. They're all grass. Now, if you have a gluten allergy, there's no guarantee that gluten goes away with sprouting. So it's generally recommended that you avoid gluten grain, like wheat and other grains that have gluten in them, because it still might bother you if you're really sensitive. These are a couple of this Tribest company. We own at our house. We have one of the white ones. It's the best thing for wheatgrass. It's kind of a booger to clean after you're done because it's all wound up with squished wheatgrass in there. But the pulp or the juice comes out into the little container, and then the pulp comes out the end. Again, it's a different kind of juicer. And then there's another juicer called the Champion that we have as well. We found the Tribest because it's made for wheatgrass. Worked a little bit better with it. There's a hand cranked model, not nearly as this is kind of pricey. This one's not as pricey, and it can be converted, I guess, later. I've never done it, but I hear tell that if you can get a motor for it eventually and convert it if you want to. Hand cranking is good exercise. That's not all I can say for it. But it is possible. And but this company also, is a great one if you want to buy juicers from them. They're available readily on the internet. So what can go wrong? This picture up here is, the tips are turning brown. The little plantlet, the little leaves that are starting to form are turning brown. They got a little over matured. They're either too dry or too wet. They both sound kind of the same symptoms, or too old. They're just been in the fridge too long. Now there's these little, I don't have a picture of them, but sometimes when you're looking at your like your microgreens, the things that are in soil, you could look down there and you'll see that like these fine little hairs coming off of the sprouts, and it kind of looks like mold. But if you look very closely, they're just fine little roots that if the sprouts aren't getting enough water, they put out these little roots looking for more. So these little roots are not harmful. They're not mold, and it just means you need to maybe give them a little bit more water, or water them a little more often. So pale and spindly microgreens, planted too densely is the main problem, or not enough light. You kind of get used to it after a while of planting microgreens, of how densely to plant them. I usually try to leave about a seed space between each seed, but obviously there's hundreds, maybe thousands of seeds, so you're not going to be spacing them all perfectly. You just do your best, kind of, let's see, not enough light. Obviously, they need some light to turn their colors. Baby greens or wheatgrass, they need fertilizer, a little more fertilizer. So that'll pep them up. Sometimes overnight, if you give them a little feeding of liquid kelp, they'll literally respond immediately. Mold, I personally have never had mold happen. It's too warm or too cold usually. It's either so clammy and that you get kind of a mildew or rot in there, or if it's too warm, you'll get more of a fuzzy mold usually. Um, Give them a little more air circulation. It's, once they're up and growing, you can even put a little whisper fan or a fan in the room, something to keep the air going. If you're using funky water, that can make your sprouts smell funky. Um, Sometimes if you see a little bit of mold or a problem in one end of your, if it's a sheet of microgreens, you can pull it out and save the other ones. If it, if you get some sort of a nasty thing happening, then you're best just to throw them all out and sterilize your equipment and start over. Okay, this is my last slide. These are some sources for seeds and supplies. They're all well known, and there's certainly others out there. I could have gone on for pages, I guess, but these are some that I've either dealt with or I know people that have dealt with them. Gardener Supply has a lot of equipment. They sell a lot of lights and things like that. True Leaf has a lot of seeds and supplies. They really come on strong, and a lot of the commercial growers, I think, buy from True Leaf because they sell bulk, large amounts. You can get pounds and pounds of the kind of seed if you want from them. Most of the other ones sell smaller amounts, maybe something along the lines. This is a 1 pound package. You can get smaller ones, you can get larger ones. I find a 1 pound is a good size for a family to use up in a respectable length of time so the seeds don't get old. But if you're growing microgreens, and that's for sprouting. If you're growing microgreens, you might go through them even faster. So you'll get the idea if you now. Does anybody have any questions if you put them in the chat? I hope I've covered everything. Those of you who have not picked up your kits yet, I'm going to leave them in the probably out for the rest of the week in the foyer where we have our curbside pickup for our books. They're on a lower shelf, and they're usually alphabetically arranged so you can find your kit quickly. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. As for the people who came in later, this will be put on YouTube tomorrow, so you can rewatch it if you feel like it. If you have any questions, you can email me, Quackenbush at lion.lib.mi.us. It's on the website. So let's see, suggestion for a local garden center to buy seeds or kits. Frankly, I guess I've gotten so used to mail order that I haven't really looked too hard. I have definitely gone to places where they sell, they get flats and things like that. You can get at most garden centers. But as far as the seeds, I generally do buy them online. Now you could ask if you go to a family-owned, I don't know if you could get, Lowe's or Walmart or, somebody like that to order for you in a big box store. But if you go to a locally or family-owned nursery, you could just say, can you order me these things? Maybe they can. They have access to them. Maybe it never occurred to them to carry them. So you can definitely start a dialogue with them about carrying those things. Your best price, somebody said Better Health and Novi sells some types of seeds. So that's one thing. I bet you Whole Foods does too. Any place that's dealing in health food stores would probably have them. And again, if they don't tell them, they don't know people are looking for them if they don't ask. So if they think that there's a market in the area, they might start carrying them. Let's see, sprouting seeds are the same as microgreens. Yeah, microgreens are just basically sprouts that have allowed to grow until they get their leaves on them. Um, uh, there's there's most of the same types of seeds are used for microgreens that are used for sprouting. Microgreens, you can actually go a little farther, and like I said, you can do some herbs and things like that. They don't sprout nearly as fast as your alfalfa seeds and mung beans and things like that. So it takes longer. So they're generally grown as microgreens rather than sprouts. But microgreens give you have a better selection, I guess, when you're growing microgreens. Uh, any other questions? I'm not seeing any. Oh, great. So yeah. Any questions that you can't be answered by rewatching this, or or you don't feel like rewatching it, just email me. And my email is on the web. If you go to the LTPL Grows section of our website, they'll have contact information there too. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and looking forward to seeing you all in person someday. But until then, I'm going to sign off and say goodbye.